Today, we are doing quarter 4, week 6, domestic policy and the Supreme Court. Here we have a current picture of the U.S. Supreme Court. We're going to talk about how they play a role in domestic policy. Domestic policy are any issues, any issues facing our country and how we address them. So how does the Supreme Court play a role in this? Well, the Supreme Court plays a role in domestic policy because they will rule on issues concerning domestic policy. So what happens first is the legislative branch, for example, may make a law on domestic policy. And then what the Supreme Court may do, in some cases, or in some situations, the Supreme Court needs to determine if these laws are constitutional. And I'm going to give you a couple examples here on the next slide. So here are just a few examples of some of the major cases in modern history that show the Supreme Court involvement in domestic policy. We have Roe versus Wade, which was dealing with abortion. We have Loving versus Virginia, which was interracial marriage. Obergefell and Hodges, which was gay marriage. And Gideon versus Wainwright, which allowed for a lawyer if you cannot afford one. So these are just some examples of issues that were taking place in our society, so domestic problems, and how the Supreme Court played a role in that. So we're going to take a couple minutes here and talk about Obergefell versus Hodges. This happened in 2015. And in 2015, you still had 13 states that banned gay marriage. So this became a domestic policy. It was a domestic issue. It was a problem. People wanted to get married, and there were 13 states that outright banned it. There was a gentleman by the name of Obergefell, wanted to be on his husband's death certificate. His husband was ill. They had been married, but the state forbade them from being on the death certificate. And so it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in a 5-4 decision, based on the 14th Amendment, which is equal rights, gay marriage was legal. Said you have the right to allow the right to marry. right to marry. This is one example about how there was an issue, a problem that was a domestic issue. There were different laws on it. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court determined that the laws banning gay marriage were unconstitutional based on the 14th Amendment, which said that you have equal rights, therefore you have the right to decide who you want to marry. And then finally, we're going to talk about the impact on the Supreme Court. So the president gets to pick the nominee, selects the judges, and then the Senate approves them. It's a way of checks and balances. But depending on who your president is, it tends to depend on what type of a judge you select, if you select a conservative or a more liberal judge. President Trump was able to select 2 justices thus far in his presidency. He selected Justice Gorsuch and Justice Kavanaugh, and both of these justices happen to be conservative. So Trump was the one who selected both of these, and both of them are conservative judges. So that will play a role in policy. If an issue arrives in the Supreme Court, and you have more conservative judges, you tend to see more conservative decisions. If you have more liberal judges, you tend to see more liberal decisions. So this is how choosing your justices can have an impact on the court and have an impact on policy decisions in our country. And that is it for today.